Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so welcome everybody. We're finally going to get going, whatever happens, and we will use Oliver's, although we're not going to be sharing all the time, we will encourage you to download your own so that Oliver and I can be on screen while we try and do the coaching itself. So a very warm welcome to the workshop which follows yesterday's session. Let's go to the next slide, please, Oliver. So a little bit my history, a background for this. I started life as a musician. Interestingly enough, that is me sitting on the boot or the trunk, depending where you're from, of the car, meditating as a happy musician. And you can see what a couple of years of people analytics has done to me. All my hair fell out and lost all my groovy looks there, if I ever had them. I'm a post-Accenture consultant. I had a technology startup, which was quite fun, which I managed to sell and get rid of in the 90s. And today, I think the main relevance for this session is that I'm a psychologist and particularly interested in coaching. Thanks, Oliver.
Good. Let me...
Okay, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Oliver. I'm studied project management. I'm also an executive MBA, which I did afterwards. I worked like 10 years in consulting, then in large multinational organizations, various industries, cement, engineering, jewelry. And I'm really deeply passionate about strategic people analytics since several years. To improve top and bottom line, and also vast experience in digital HR and also HR transformation. So I'm really I'm passionate and energized, and I'm really looking forward to this session. And generally, professionally, my ultimate objective is like having business impact with all I do. Privately, I'm married. I have one son. I love traveling, doing sports. I love wining and dining, so that's why I need also sports. And I'm very happy here to have the session together with Max and bring you hopefully some good insights for you.
Thank you, Oliver. Tell us briefly about your career so that we can look at those as we go through the session.
So my career or my coaching objectives? What do you want me to
whatever you want. That is the beauty of what we're going to do, is that we will interpret the tests that you've done in the discussion in terms of whatever you set it. So this is a key goal for coaching, for everybody watching, is that the coach doesn't set the goal for the session. It's very much set by the client, and Oliver is the client in this session. And so he'll say the goal, and then I'm going to interpret the psychometric tests in terms of what Oliver has specified as a goal.
So for me, overall, the objective of coaching in general, I would say, is so I really would like to develop myself constantly. Time of life, what were your objectives in, like when you're 25 or I'm 48 now, that's different. So I want to develop professionally, but also personally. So why is coaching important for me is also like when there are important decisions coming up, having a neutral sounding board also in place and using more as advice also for my strategic considerations professionally or strategic development or privately. At the end, for me, it accelerates really my development, and it's giving a different view on my ideas and my objectives I have. At the end, it's a bit like a mirror coaching for me that helps myself to develop.
Okay, so if you were to, can you hear me with the headset on, Oliver?
Absolutely, perfect.
Okay. I just want to say, who was asking about the sound, is the sound better if I use the headset, Ramona? Okay, let us know. I'm going to assume that it is unless we hear otherwise. So, Oliver, what would you say? Fantastic, thank you. Oliver, what would you say is your primary objective then? If we were to list a goal for the session, what do you want to come out knowing or having greater insight into?
Okay. So for me, the insight would be what kind of position in a company, right, in the people analytics space, where I can provide the largest value and where is my greatest asset to have a strategic impact from a people analytics point of view. So this would be my question for the session.
Fantastic. Okay, so how can we help you to maximize your impact on strategic people analytics?
Exactly.
Okay, let's work towards that. Let's move on. Thank you. Okay, so what we're going to cover during today's session is I'm going to do a very quick review we discussed yesterday in the 45-minute session, in case you weren't there, and I'm assuming that most of you weren't at that session. Then going to talk about very briefly, a minute or two, about the concepts of psychometric testing, and then we're going to start the actual coaching session with Oliver so that you can see how we interpret the tests. And I hope that all of you have managed to do your tests because you can interpret them at the same time. You are very welcome to place questions in the chat as we go along. I would suggest that I'm just wondering whether we should use the Q&A. I would suggest let's rather put them in the chat rather than in the Q&A. But Oliver, maybe you can just glance at the Q&A every now and again. But I think it would be easier if you want to ask specific questions. Okay, let's next one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what we covered yesterday in the session was what the importance of having a meaningful career. And the real point that we made yesterday is that what we find in psychology and in research is that when people come to the end of their lives, I know this sounds a little bit dark, but when we're all eventually going to leave this earth and wherever you believe you're going to go to next, when you look back in your life, you may have made millions and millions in terms of money and had lots of power, etc., etc. The thing that people regret most is wasting their life. They look back and they say, I wasted my life. And because your career is 1/3 of your life, roughly, so let's say 1/3 of your life is family and friends, 1/3 is sleeping, and 1/3 is roughly working. Your 1/3 of the meaning that you create in your life. You do not want to lie on a deathbed one day, look back and say, I wasted my life not doing meaningful stuff. I'm not saying what meaningful should be to you. We covered that yesterday. We all have a different idea of what meaningful is, but that is key. The next thing that we discussed was understanding the people analytics environment where everybody works. And I think the main points that we made during that session were that there are two kinds of roles in people analytics. There's what we call alignment, and then there's what we call monitoring. So alignment is about ensuring that the workforce strategy is aligned with the business strategy. That requires the use of predictive analytics, machine learning, AI, and so on. The other type of people analytics is called monitoring, and that uses dashboards and visualizations and basic tools, Excel maybe, but none of the AI and machine learning as much. The point is that the future of people analytics is probably going to be more towards alignment. So if you're preparing your career and looking forward, I would look towards alignment purely because I believe that monitoring, dashboards, visualization is going to be automated really soon. People like me are working on automating that. You've got Watson from IBM. Everybody is automating the basic stuff. So if you are relying on your Tableau and Power BI skills and so on and creating so on, I think that you could have a short career because of automation. We also spoke about the kind of skills that you would need for, let's say, a leadership role, which is, I know, what Oliver is going to be looking at and what we'll look at in depth today. And also for technical roles, what are the kinds of traits that you'll need? And we'll discuss those during today's session. And you're welcome to ask in the chat about what kind of traits and characteristics you will need from your psychometrics. Then we spoke about doing a personal deep dive. What we said is that it's very difficult to find a meaningful career unless you have a deep understanding of yourself. And that is what today's session is about. We're focusing on that block. We're doing the personal deep dive. I've been working with Oliver as coaching with Oliver for many years now. Oliver, do you just want to say a couple of words about the impact of a deep dive, learning about yourself? How has it benefited you and your work?
So it's really, you learn so much about yourself, right? So because sometimes you don't have an objective view how you react on certain situations. By digging deeper into yourself helps you first really understand yourself, how you react, why you react in this way, and also in which situations you react differently. And this basic fundament helps you really to observe your own behavior in the future and to get better also in the direction where you would like to go. So it's really helpful. It's work, right? Obviously, you need to be ready for this, but it really helps you and privately, and bring both worlds also together, because you cannot separate them, obviously, right?
I think one of the points that you once brought out in coaching, which I found quite insightful, and I love it when clients come out with their own insights rather than relying on me. Oliver will tell you, I work in very hard. There's a lot of insight and a lot of exploration. One of the insights that struck me, Oliver, was when you said you learned the power of showing vulnerability. Tell us a little bit about that.
So vulnerability is like really when there's like this, let's say, school of thoughts for leadership, right? So I was growing up also a bit in tougher industries, right? A lot of elbow mentality. And there was vulnerability not so much shown, right? But then actually this is one instrument which helps you to get also trust in your teams and also trust from your stakeholders. So I applied this consciously based on the session which I had with Max, and I made a really, really good experience. It has empowered myself. I think even getting an even better leader than before. And I'm very thankful for this insight which we work together on.
Yeah, it's quite difficult showing vulnerability as a leader, because you want to be tough and you want to be the person in charge and showing the direction and doing the performance reviews. But actually, I think you said that it allowed you to get closer to your team by showing that you are a human being with your own vulnerabilities and frailties and errors, etc.
Exactly. You need to exactly see where you apply it and how you apply it. But I had once in my previous career, really amazing team, which was really like very coherent. We worked very closely together. We were an absolutely very challenging group. But also brought fantastic results with really, really good business impact. And I applied this there, and I made really, really a good experience. And it helped the team overall, and it also helped myself, because I think that even makes you stronger when you show vulnerability and then weaker at the end.
Thank you. Okay, so we used a lot of the insights from the psychometrics that we're about to look at to help gauge things like that. The psychometrics themselves don't give the answers. They are a conversation starter. So let me say that immediately. I do not believe what psychometrics say exactly. Something great to put on the table with you, with clients, with everybody, and then we discuss. Sometimes Oliver might say, I completely disagree with what the psychometric is telling us. He'll probably do it today. That's good. He'll tell us why he disagrees. I will then say whether I think I agree with him, or I will say, no, Oliver, my experience of you agrees with the psychometric. I think you lack awareness of yourself. And he'll say, Max, I think you lack awareness of yourself. And then we'll have a discussion, and we'll have a laugh, or we'll punch each other at the end of it. But one way or another, we will come up with insights. So you take these insights and then you use them to match your role and your behavior to what you have learned from the insights. The next thing we spoke about yesterday was taking charge of your life. It's not up to your parents, your family, your partner, society, your culture to determine what you're going to do with your life and your career. It's up to you. Only you have got your interests in your heart. Maybe you and your mother are the only two people who have got your real interest. And even your mother sometimes, I may question whether they truly have all your interests at heart as much. You are the one who needs to take charge because you have got interests. So don't say, I'm waiting for the world to improve, or I'm waiting for my boss to give me a promotion, or I'm waiting for this, I'm waiting for that. You need to do it now, and you need to take charge. We then spoke a little bit about being different and standing out from the crowd if you want to get that ideal role. One of the examples we use is that if you use the automated tracking system, ATS, to apply for a role, if there are 100 people applying for a role and you use the same system as the other 100 people, you have a chance of 1 in 100 of getting that job. Will have similar competencies to you. Come on, you know this because you are on the other end of recruiting people. You know how it works. A recruitment manager will look at the resume, will interview the person, they'll use their gut feel, and they'll come in. Even if there is a beautiful automated people analytics process, you need to stand out. And so the kinds of things that I've done to get clients, to get jobs in the past, is I found out where the hiring manager or where one of the managers likes to have a drink or likes to be in the evening, and by coincidence I might find myself in the same place, and I will have a conversation with the person. Immediately I am different to the other 99 people who go through the ATS. That's an example of taking charge. Another one I spoke about is using a system called the Circle of Leverage, which allows you to write letters to the target organization rather than simply using the ATS, and allows you to get attention by the way that you describe yourself. And the Circle of Leverage has got a whole lot of interesting techniques which we could talk about sometime. And the final thing we spoke about is start now. People say, you know, we need to start sometime in the future. I think that's crazy. Your life, if you have a look, one of the exercise that we did yesterday, look at how old you are now. Take your current age, subtract it from the age that you think you are going to stop working one day. So if you are 35 now and you plan to stop working when you're 65, that means that there are 30 years of work left for you. Look how quickly the last 30 years of your life went past. Look how relatively few years you have got left for your career. You really have to start now. Delaying it, I once heard somebody say, a slightly risque example is that delaying your career development is like keeping sex for your old age. It's just a really silly thing to do. You're not going to appreciate your career or the rest of your life if you keep it over. Okay, Oliver, let's move on.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next slide, psychometric testing concepts. Okay, so let's just quickly say, what are psychometric tests? So they are just a way of quantifying, or an attempt at quantifying, your behavior and what you are thinking. We recognize that people are all different to each other, and we want to see in what way is this person's attitude perhaps different from the norm. The next point is that the key criteria of the psychometric test is that basically it needs to be rigorous. It's standardized, so everybody takes the same test in the same way, so there's no bias. You can't say, oh, one person had the test much easier than somebody else. So psychometric tests are standardized. They are reliable, which means that if you take the test now and you take it in a couple of months' time, it should give you the same score for stable traits. Of course, if it's learning traits, we hope that the score will be improved, but for stable traits like personality, maybe emotional intelligence, we can debate whether you can change that or not, and it needs to be valid. In other words, it needs to measure. If it says it's measuring personality, it must measure personality. It's really important that I tell you this because you are people analytics practitioners, when you buy a psychometric test or use a psychometric test, it's really important for you to see that it does meet these criteria there. Otherwise, it's not a valid test. There are millions of tests that do not meet all of these criteria. I can tell you one now immediately, for example, is like MBTI. Myers-Briggs does not meet all of these criteria as being a psychometric test in that sense. So even if something has a big name, you need to see that it does meet the criteria. Otherwise, the data that you get from it may not be totally valid. There are various types of psychometric tests. So there are tests for aptitudes, for numerical reasoning, personality, EI, and we're going to have a look at examples of some of those. Thanks, Oliver. Okay, so why do we use psychometric tests rather than other methods? Well, as I said earlier, they provide a level of objectivity because everybody goes through the same kind of process. How do they work? The main thing that you will use them for is that you will be comparing the person's scores to some criterion. Now, you can say, well, how can you compare my personality scores to other personality scores? Well, I can compare, for example, let's say we're doing emotional intelligence and I'm looking for awareness of own emotions, self-awareness. I might want to see how does this person's self-awareness compare to the rest of the population. So when they create psychometric tests, they are normed against population. So they might be normed against other leaders in India, or you might compare them to other leaders in Europe. You'll get different norm groups and you can see how does this person compare to the norm group. And you can also see, looking at our high performers, how does this person's emotional intelligence compare to other high performers in the organization when you're using them for recruitment. And finally, what are psychometric workforce applications? Well, they're fairly obvious if you're in people analytics. I hope you know most of this, but you can use them for recruitment purposes to get the person and make sure the person is a good fit with the role, which is what we're going to be doing today with your scores. And you can use them for development purposes to see where can people change. Be very careful of knowing what you can change and what you cannot change. Personality, for example, by definition, is something that does not change over time. Emotional intelligence, for example, there's a lot of debate about whether it can change, but on balance, I think you can improve your emotional intelligence. Learning styles, which we're going to cover today, which you saw in the tests, you can definitely learn other learning styles, etc. Thanks, Oliver. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, as we go into the tests, I'm really going to do a stream of consciousness. This is pretty much genuinely how I give my clients feedback. Every coach, every psychologist will have their own style of working with their clients. I'm going to give it literally. I haven't planned this. Oliver and I have not practiced this. Oliver's probably a little bit nervous about how much information about him is about to go into the public domain, but that's the vulnerability that we were talking about. You can see I'm quite tough on my clients, but I think it's good for them, makes them stronger ultimately. So this is very unplanned and very genuine stream of consciousness. So let's hit it. Okay, Oliver, let's now switch to the big picture. I'm gonna, if all of you can please follow on the on the download, I'll put it in to the chat again for you to look at. Okay, Oliver, so you can stop the sharing.
I stopped.
I'm still seeing the picture there. Never mind. Good. Okay, now I see it. Got it. So there in the chat for everybody, there is the scores for you to have a look at. We are now on slide which says 5-factor model. So that's where you should be. I don't know if there's a slide number on that one in particular. Oh, slide number 12, 5-factor model. So the 5-factor model is in exactly by definition personality. In fact, the 5-factor model is probably one of the only models really validated and used mostly by psychologists. In other words, most psychologists, when they talk about personality, are talking about this 5-factor model. And we use the acronym CANOE, conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, or emotional stability. We'll talk about that. It's the same thing. Openness, new experiences, and extroversion. Those 5 things in a human being are fairly stable from age 6 to around 60. And so you cannot change them. Life traumatic event might change it, like a big car accident or being in a war. For example, from the Ukraine, we are expecting lots of post-traumatic stress disorders and personality change as a result of what people go through. But for most of us in life, our personality is going to be very stable throughout our lives. So if I know what you were like at the age of 6 in terms of conscientiousness, I probably have a rough idea of what you're going to be like at the age of 60. Because you can't change them easily, you usually use this for recruitment purposes because you need to fit. So what is the right environment for somebody with a very high conscientiousness score? What is the right environment for somebody with a very low agreeableness score, average? So you look at your score, and then from that score, you are going to choose the right environment for that. So let's have a look at Oliver's scores on these. Conscientiousness. So Oliver, conscientiousness, as you can see there, is all about being very orderly, a high score, decisive, consistency, reliable, industrious, that kind of thing. Oliver scores really high on that. Now, I want to know, in terms of Oliver's goal to make an impact as a strategic people analytics leader, what is the role of conscientiousness in that? So, Oliver, give us your reflections on your score. First, do you think it's accurate?
I think it's accurate. I would say that's obviously always interesting what's in the peer group, right? But I think we don't discuss it here. But I'm actually in the topics which I mentioned there. I think this reflects also a bit my own observation. And I think what is important in leadership position, and for me is always people analytics is always for me like a startup in a company. I know some companies are more mature, right? Some less, but still it's developing so amazingly fast. So you need this kind of explanation, which is which is mentioned. You need like the orderless, decisive, consistency, reliability. For example, you need to kind of these traits to move this more and more into the organization and getting more and more strategic impact.
But you do believe it's reflective of you. Now, the danger of a very high conscientiousness score, if you look at your own score, in a leadership role, that is that it may reflect a lack of flexibility and doing things in new ways. In other words, think of the extreme of high conscientiousness as being obsessive compulsive disorder, that everything has to be, all the CDs and the DVDs and the books are in alphabetical, all it's color coded, and the clothes are color coded on the shelves. So Oliver, your score almost tends towards being very high in terms of orderliness, and we need to look at flexibility. However, I want to tell you that my experience of working with you is that I don't think your conscientiousness is that high. So you may have answered the questions in a way that you thought this is how I should be coming across, rather than how I actually experience you as a client. What do you think?
So how you explain it, because you know me quite well, and I reflect, I'm very experimental, right? So when it comes to people analytics, I'm not doing things which other people have constantly done. Yeah. I'm trying to do really the new things where maybe you even don't know how it perfectly works, right? But from time to time to find the right move, maybe we're moving forward. I try to be as honest and straightforward as possible when answering the question, but it could be, I'm German, what should I say? I need to be organized by default, right?
Exactly, your nature.
But I like really to experiment, to build new things, and also try to do things in a different way like they have been done before also. So this supports what you have said, Max, definitely.
I also find that a lot of people answer these questions how they would behave at work rather than how they would behave at home. That is understandable and it's fair enough. I believe that you probably should answer the questions with your work hat on, but what I would prefer is that you are authentic, that you are the same person at work and the same person at home. It is really exhausting faking personality. And I urge people from saying, I can get this job by pretending to be an extrovert. For example, you will only manage to do that for 2 or 3 months before you crack and you start having a nervous breakdown, etc. All right. Sorry, do you want to make a point?
This is one thing, Max, just what you mentioned on this, like playing a role in the job or privately, doesn't matter, right? One of my, even before I've known Max, right, one of a leadership development session was you play always a bit of a role, but you should, the more you play a role in your professional or private relationship, this sucks of energy of you, and this energy you cannot spend somewhere else, and you're also not happy at the end, right? So you're also not satisfied. So this is very important what you said. You should be very authentic, very important. That's what I learned in coaching also. This was a very good insight, huh?
The only thing I must disagree with is that you had a life before you met me, but we can
we can take this offline. But what you guys say, I agree, obviously.
You see. Okay, the next one is agreeableness. We'll need to speed this up a little bit if we're going to finish at 4:45. So that is, you're welcome to put comments about your own scores in the chat, by the way, if you want to. Agreeableness, the way I look at it, you can see it, how warm, affectionate, gentleness, generosity. I have and that's the technical way. The way I prefer to look at it is if there is an issue during a meeting, let's say, that you are in, how likely are you to open your mouth and say that is an issue or let things slide? Now, that is a big question. Do you only open your mouth when it is a big issue, or do you, if it's a small issue, do you say, it makes no difference, I'm not going to waste the meeting having a tidy discussion about that? If you are very agreeable, you will never open your mouth even for a huge issue. And if your agreeableness score is very low, you and disagree with everybody, that there's too much sugar in the coffee or something that is completely irrelevant. So Oliver, without even looking at your score, what would you say your agreeableness level in meetings is like? Do you let things go very quickly?
No, I changed it also. So my tendency was a bit to let things sometimes go, but I changed it since a long time also in my career. So I see it as a duty, especially in a leadership position, but also in a not leadership position. When you think and you're convinced things don't go in the right direction, it's your duty actually to tell it, but in a way that is appropriate for the situation and for the audience, right? Sometimes you need to flag it in a one-to-one, you may flag it afterwards, but at the end, it's your duty to do it. It's not often the what, but it's the how, right? No.
And if it's a minor issue, though, that's the question.
No. A minor issue, if it doesn't have, if 20 people sit together or 10 people, they cost a fortune of money when they sit together. And you pick on the smallest issue, everybody will do it at the same time. That's just, you need to have this sense, this emotional intelligence. What is the right amount to do for very small issues? I think that's just not appropriate, right?
So that's very interesting. So Karen, I see your comment there. Your score is 77, so you are even more agreeable than Oliver. So let me say that for a leadership role, I think you need to be between 40 and 60, ideally. So in Oliver's case, I would suggest to Oliver that he works out whether he is trying to be too much of a team pleaser in his roles, although that 7% is very small. In other words, it's within the level of measurement error. But I would say for a leader, when I see the score going high, so Corin, definitely for your score, I would say if you are looking at a leadership role, you should consider whether you're agreeing with people. Now, trying to change that is very difficult because, as I say, these are stable from age 6 to 60. You may therefore, Corin specifically, not want to get into a role that requires you to disagree with people. For example, don't become a policeman or a policewoman. In a leadership role, if you have to disagree with teams and make them make a particular difference, a middle. You also don't want a very low score where you're disagreeing with people all the time. So, Oliver, in your case of 67, as I say, I think that's quite a fair score. I'm getting a noise. Are you hearing this noise in the background?
I'm getting also noise. If somebody is constantly dialing in and out, a ping, ping,
maybe
ping.
Maybe if I mute the mics, that might make a difference. Yeah, that's somebody's mic was just live. I think that's all. Okay, that's great. Trait versus state, Littell. Good question. There's a lot of debate. It also boils down to the nature-nurture debate, Littell. So are you born with something or can you change it over life? So that's what I was saying about emotional intelligence, for example. There's debate about that. Personality, there's no debate if it's measured properly, like a 5-factor test. There's no doubt that it is stable. There's tons of research to indicate that. People often report to me that their scores at work when they do the test wearing a work hat versus a personal hat are different. And I say what I said to them earlier on is be very careful that you are not faking either at home or faking your personality at work, because one way or another, it is going to exhaust you. You're much better off being authentic as you go along. If you're in a more technical role, by the way, I would say that agreeableness score is probably less important if you are at the extremes, as long as it's not getting in the way of work. For a leadership role in particular, it's important. I didn't say for conscientiousness, if you are in a more technical role. I would say in general, for technical or specialist roles, conscientiousness is very important. Because you are doing or you are doing coding, for example, all of those are very, very specific. Like if you're an accountant, I would give the same advice. Are you guys also hearing this beeping noise?
I hear it,
Oliver. Just wondering where that is coming from, because I've muted the mics. Natal, you're also hearing it. Magna, everybody's hearing it. Okay, let's hope that it disappears. Barry, maybe you can have a look for us and just see what that's about. Okay, let's move on to the most interesting one, in my opinion. Neuroticism. This is the extent to which you will get stressed by events around you. One great example that somebody said is, and maybe this is a bad example for 2022 with a war going on in the world, but what this law says is that if the president of a country whose hand is on the button to push nuclear warheads, if they have a fight with their partner at home in the morning, you want them to make the same decision at lunchtime if they have to push the button as if they did not have a fight with their partner in the morning. In other words, whatever events happen in the day should not affect your decision making. And that is very important for a leader. A leader's decisions should not be affected by events, good or bad, going on in their lives. So what you are looking for is a very low neuroticism score. It's sometimes called emotional stability, where it is the opposite. So, for example, neuroticism of 12.5, you could say, is the same as emotional stability of 100 minus 12.5, 88.5. So, yes, so in relationships, for example, romantic relationships, what makes happy couples? What we learned immediately is that people with high neuroticism scores have a much harder time in relationships, and that is at work as well, by the way, because every stress that comes along affects the way that they communicate. I probably don't have the lowest neuroticism score myself. My neuroticism score is nowhere near as low as Oliver's. In fact, Oliver's is so low that it's almost unbelievably low, but he is pretty... What do you think about your score, Oliver?
So I think I'm generally a very stable person, right? In a sense, I try to be consistent in privately and professionally. I try to be consistent. It takes a lot to bring me out of my routines, right? In a general way. But but I didn't think it's that low, because at the end I'm a human being, right? So you know me, right? So obviously things can irritate me. I'm not a machine. So I think
But you do have a tendency when you're stressed to dive into yourself and stop communicating. This is sort of the stereotypical male. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus, what he wrote in that book. And he said when men experience trouble and stress in their lives, they like to withdraw into their caves, whereas females like to go to the group and to share, and that is how they deal with it. So it's interesting that your score is low, but yet when you are stressed, you withdraw. Maybe that is your way of coping with it, though.
Mm-hmm. I think under stress, I really look to which people I'm talking to. So when I try to talk to people which at that time had me getting out potentially of the decision. Is this always right or wrong? That's a separate topic, right? But that's how it is. Yeah.
Okay, great. So that's neuroticism. Corin, I note your score of 31%. That is very low. So generally in 5-factor tests, we say from 0 to 40 is lowish, 40 to 60 tends to be average, and 60 and above tends to be high. So you are quite comfortably then. And Lital, I take it means you are somewhere between 40 and 60. That's great. What you do not want in a leadership role is a very high score. Let me say that in other roles, if you are in sales, you actually want a high, because showing emotion and reacting to the environment in sales is quite important. Again, it's not as important in a technical role, especially if you're working as an individual. I see about men and women differences. Yes, understood. Only on average. Yes, of course, all of the stuff is only on average, but it's founded in very deep research. So most of the comments that we generalized will generalize for as high as 90% of the population. Okay. Oliver, is that noise? Is there any chance that it could be your microphone connection? Because you're not using a headset, are you?
No, I think I talked to Barry and he mentioned it might be even on your computer, right? I can try to mute myself when I don't talk, and then we see if it's my computer. I can try.
Okay, I can try that, and I can do the same on mine. There's a message. I see the message from Barry. Okay, moving on. The next one is openness to new experiences. Now, this is a really interesting one. It often correlates with IQ, for example. It's about creativity. The way that I remember openness to new experiences is to say, do you tend to go to a new place every year when you go on vacation, on holiday, or do you tend to go to the same kind of places? That's a fantastic predictor of somebody's openness score. Or do you go to the same restaurant? You know, if you find a restaurant that you love, you always go back to this, or are you one of these people who always wants to try going to somewhere new? So openness reflects the extent to which you are likely to embrace new technologies, new strategies at work, trying new people analytics tools, new ways of doing things. Now, you don't want a score that is way high, because that means you are going to be playing with toys and trying new things and never implementing anything. So you're looking for a score that is not low, because if you are low, it means you will not embrace new technology and new change. You're looking for a medium score. However, if you are in R&D, or you are somebody who is looking at new technologies for your organization, you definitely want your score to be on the higher side. Otherwise, you will be very unhappy in your work if you are not doing that and you have a high score. So, Oliver, your thoughts on your openness score? Do you eat at the same restaurants? Do you go on a new holiday every year?
No, so usually I try always, because I'm a foodie, right? I love just food in general, like cooking. I go always to new restaurants and exotic ones. I tend also, when there's a good one, I go there several times. I try to go on different places on holiday, very exotic ones. So I'm doing really a bit dangerous gravel and sand motorbike tours in Latin America. But for example, on the other side, we go since years to my parents-in-law on the same place in Croatia, but that's more or less the only place. So I would agree. I try to do new things, right, constantly, but not to the complete extreme. If I do something a couple of times at the same time, I don't get bored immediately. So I think
yeah, sorry, carry on.
I would confirm. I would have thought it's a bit higher, to be honest. So just from a gut feeling point of view, right? But it's in the range.
Okay. Don't confuse this with risk taking. We are going to come to that shortly if we get there. We need to move up to do that. But it's very interesting. Stevie, your score of 92% openness. So you must have an IQ, firstly, that is over the moon. That is quite interesting. I wonder how you get on interpersonally when you are that clever. That must be very interesting. And you love novelty, you love trying new things. That's a great score. I hope that you are in a specialist role of some kind, because that would suit. Karen, you're 77, nice, slightly higher than that. I guess what I would say to you and Stevie is that, are you tolerant of people who are less open and less fast as you? Anna, same for you. When you have very high openness scores, you may tend to see the rest of the world as being rather slow and rather dull because they are doing boring things all the time. You need to look very carefully that if you're a leader, for example, that you take into account that people are not the same as you. And that is something, Oliver, that you had to make adjustments for with some of your score, particularly your neuroticism score, as I recall, because you are so little upsets Oliver in life that he cannot understand it when other people get upset as easily, and it takes practice. I'm the same, by the way. It's not just him, many of us, that you actually have to imagine, just because I do not get stressed by life does not mean that other people in my team do not get stressed. Huh, Oliver?
Sorry,
you're muted, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is like also like what helps reflecting your behavior, literally reflecting also how is your behavior, what does it make with other people? So this is one example, right? I have just the setup. I don't get distracted a lot. Usually I'm also mainly in good mood. That's how I was born, right? I did not do anything. But then you need really to see what does it do to other people, and do you actually also from time to time just tell it like this, or sometimes also just adapt your behavior accordingly to the situation. So this is one of the good insights, right? I'm personally very happy with my setup, but you have also learnings how you can improve even more.
Okay, that's a great point. And you're constantly learning basically as you go along. The last one on this one is about extroversion. And this is the extent to which being with other people energizes you. So do you get energized by other people? Now, in Oliver's case here, I think, as I know him, that this is an underestimate. I think you are closer to 90%, Oliver. What do you think?
So I am more extrovert, significantly more than an introvert. This is clear. If I would go to a 90 or 95, but I just enjoy people, meeting people, networking on a professional environment, stakeholder management. So that's what I deeply enjoy. If it is 75, it goes in the direction of 90, but I think it's more on the upper scale. I just love meeting people privately and professionally and learn new people, right? Oh, definitely. And I like to go to conferences, speak there, and so on. So that's a bit my nature.
So generally, introverts, unlike Oliver, generally find that people suck the energy out of them, and so they prefer to be alone. They love remote working, going into the office can be a little bit exhausting. For somebody like Oliver with such a high extroversion score, he would find that being at home is exhausting because there's no energy supply that he gets. Basically, extroverts view people as batteries. They are giving them lovely energy, whereas introverts look at people as lows, as a load on their life. So looking at some of your scores there, 17%. That is extremely introverted. That's probably I get tired quite quickly when I'm interacting a lot. Stevie, again, interesting pattern. So of course, we need to look at these scores in combination, and we're going to need a lot more time to look at that. But a combination of a very high openness, love new experiences, but enjoy being alone, that means that you're going to spend a lot of time on the internet, Stevie. I can predict that your experiences are not coming from interacting with people like Oliver's, for example, but from around the world. Corin, quite average on yours. I would say that to be a leader, you may be looking on the higher side purely because leaders have to interact with people a lot. If you are a manager, and if you find that tiring, it will not be good. So all of the scores there are great, excepting, well, Stevie, I would say if you need to interact with people regularly as a leader, I think that could be tiring, and certainly the 17% is going to be very tiring. Those are great jobs for people who are doing coding, analysis. Artists, for example, often find that they have very low extroversion scores. Okay, so looked at in totality, I would love to extend the session, but I would say that looking at the scores in front of me together, here is somebody who's very conscientious, reasonably agreeable, doesn't get upset by what is going on, is but for new experiences and loves people. To me, that sounds pretty much like a typical leader type profile if you put those together. There are no red flags that would stand out for me in those. Let us move on then. Thanks, Michael. So looking at yours, I'm happy to go through scores, actually. It does mean we may not finish the test, or we may need to ask Barry to schedule us a longer time to do that. Barry, you're sending messages here on Backstage, but when I click it, I see it's about the beeping. Okay, well, it's stopped now, so touch wood. I just want to have a look at that set of scores that came through there quickly. So openness 67, enjoys new experiences, extroverted. Michael, I would say that you are leadership material archetypal like Oliver. It's like a profile, a template leadership profile, what I would be looking for. In fact, Oliver, those are virtually your scores as it happens.
Close, yeah.
Very close, very close. So that's how I, as a psychologist, you see, I just see the shape of scores walking around. That's how I can immediately say that's similar to this person, because I see people in that shape. But Michael, I would say that if you were a developer or in some sort of a technical role, I would say that you should seriously think about, if leadership is of interest to you, you should seriously think about whether that isn't something that would give you more satisfaction. Okay, let's move on to this next one, the next slide, which is number 14, page 14 on the PDF, which I hope everybody has downloaded. If you're new, let me immediately put it in here again for everybody to get hold of. So learning styles is everybody has a particular preferred way of gaining knowledge or of learning. Now, in people analytics, learning and gaining knowledge is absolutely critical, obviously. We're in a young, fast-moving, fast-developing field. But what I want to say, the most important thing that I've learned about learning styles, it's not your learning style that's important. It's not Oliver's, he's an activist. We'll look at what that means in a second. It's what is the learning styles of your team around you. And this applies whether you are a developer or an analyst as much. Your job is to become flexible in learning styles so that you can speak to other people in their preferred. So the fact is that if you are talking to somebody like Oliver, you should speak to him in the way that activists like to learn. But if Oliver has in his team somebody who is a pragmatist, he should be speaking to that person like a pragmatist. So you really want to practice developing all these different ways of learning. And I think in the test that you did, there are many links about how to develop all of your learning styles so that you become a multi-learning style person to improve your own communication with other people in your team, or if you're a leader of other people. So let's have a look at these styles here. Oliver, dominantly, but not by a long way, I have to say. There's quite a good balance in these scores. Oliver loves learning by doing things. That is an activist. So, you know, I once made the mistake of asking Oliver to read a book about statistics. I realize now, looking at his learning style, that this is a huge error asking him, because that is how you teach a theorist. You do not teach activists by giving them a book. You sit down and you say, let's do some statistics together, and you experience doing the statistics. That is how you deal with activists, and that is Oliver's preferred style. Pragmatists, on the other hand, they will not even bother to learn something unless they know there is an application. Pragmatists often suffer at university or higher education with the subjects that are not core to why they are at university. So if you are going to university to learn computer science or to study literature, but you know you have to do other subjects as well to get the degree, you will hate those other subjects because there is no application for them. Again, respect other people in your team. They may have that style, even if it is not your style. Theorists, I'm 100% a theorist. So my scores would say 1.0 theorist and 0 for everything else. I have to read the book, do the Udemy course, do the degree first before I even think about applying the learning. Hello.
I'm now back again.
And me too. Did we all disappear there?
So somebody else in the call, type it in the chat, please.
I'm looking at the list of viewers. Now I think it took everybody out. You know why? Maybe it's because Barry left.
No, I think they are writing now, the audience, that they can see us both. The chat is also back. I think we can continue.
Okay, we continue. Fantastic. I don't know what happened there, folks. The platform bounced Oliver and I out. Oliver, can you just drop Barry a note and let him know while I describe the next trait? So I was saying, thank you. So theorists, for example, I was saying prefer to learn beforehand is their style. So when you are dealing with a theorist, for example, prep them before a meeting, give them something to read. Whereas if you're dealing with an activist like Oliver, there's not much point in sending them something to read beforehand, because chances are they're going to not look at it, or they will, they will look at it in 1 second. A pragmatist will look at it and to see if it's relevant. If it's not relevant, it will go straight into the bin. You need to find a more practical way of doing that. See you there, Litel. And finally, a reflector. Quite interesting style. This it's a little bit, I can relate to it. It's learning by watching others. The big word in psychology is vicarious learning. For those of you who studied psychology, is learning by observing how other people, they like to be in the background. They typically don't enjoy being leaders
because it means you're learning by watching other people. Whereas if you are the leader of a team, other people are watching you, for example. So the main message I want to give in learning styles is to encourage you to do the exercises that came with the test, and to develop all of your learning styles so that they are equal. Littel's point, and then I want to come back to Oliver for a comment on his. Interesting. So do we have more activists? There's a nice piece of research for you, Littel. Why don't you do some research and give us the answer? What is your own type, by the way, Littel? You can put it in the chat when you are ready. Oliver, tell us about what is life like as an activist? I think you're muted, by the way.
Sorry.
Okay.
So I obviously I have 2 degrees. I went to university. I read tons of books, obviously also, but I'm naturally more learning by doing, right? So that's a bit or it's a combination, right? So I'm learning by doing. Like when I learned kite surfing, for example, I had an instructor, then I learned it, and then I just looked for the errors which I made. I watched a video, for example, how I can adapt it, for example, to get better when I did a trick and jump, for example, in kitesurfing. But I really try out, because it's the 70-20-10, right? So 70 is the old 70-20-10, right? It's on the job, and that's my strength. But I undermine it obviously also with other things. I think I don't know what's the average from a learning, but it's pretty. All is very close, right? All of the learning side. But literally, I like just doing and experimenting things.
I love the fact that your scores are very close. Excuse me.
But as you bring, right, I really like to learn, right? In general.
You do.
So yeah.
Yeah, I love the fact that your scores are so close, because that means that your communication, you will adapt it to who you're speaking with. Littel, not doing a homework, well, I can give you your scores in that case. Your conscientiousness score on the 5-factor is going to be low, and I could probably tell you a lot of the others. I'm just kidding, Littel. Interesting. Magina, same score for theorist. Oh, wow. That is amazing. An utterly balanced person in terms of that. I do know you well, Littel. Very interesting. Magna. Unusual. Did anybody else have such balanced scores as a matter of interest? No. I suspect you're not alone there, Littel, in not doing the tests. I suspect many people have not done them. You can do them afterwards, but of course you'll probably be biased in the way you answer the questions about yourself. Okay, let's move on. We're actually doing okay-ish with time, funnily enough. That's because my conscientiousness score is so high. And it freaks me out when the technology goes wrong, because I've got a high neuroticism and very high conscientiousness. And the combination of those two is that I want this webinar to go very well and structured and planned, because my conscientiousness is very high. And because it is not going well because of the sound and the dropout, etc., my neuroticism takes my stress levels up, so that if I look at my pulse when I'm doing it, you can see that it will make my pulse go high. So you can learn a lot about yourself by doing the tests. Emotional intelligence. This is always a fascinating one for people to look with. It started with the book called Emotional Intelligence. I've got some great stories with work at clients, but we haven't got time to share those. But where companies have made some huge errors in using emotional intelligence as a development measure or as a recruitment measure. To my mind, emotional intelligence is more of a development measure, because I think it can change, but maybe not a huge amount, or it takes a long time to change it, but you should definitely work on emotional intelligence. What is it? So it consists of these 4 categories: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. Let's have a look at Oliver's. The first one is self-awareness. So that is the extent to which you are aware of your own emotions and how you impact others. It's surprising that Oliver's score, these are all out of 10, by the way, is that, and especially in the pattern of the other scores, and I will come back to that. So let me just run through these, Oliver, and then I want you to come back on all of them in one shot. So this would say that Oliver is not always aware of his impact on others, and this is a coaching opportunity. This is a work opportunity. He gets on fantastically with his teams. In fact, his teams generally love him without very few exceptions, which is unusual for a manager, because remember, with agreeableness, your job is not to be loved. Your job is to deliver and to keep the team happy, of course, but your first priority is to deliver, and love is a second. So it's quite interesting how you manage to do that without having high awareness. But then let's immediately say, is that self-management now very high? And that is the extent to which you can manage your own emotions, and particularly negative ones we're talking about. It doesn't matter how you manage your positive emotions in life, does it? It's when you are angry or stressed or want to hit out at people. Oliver's very good at that with an 8 out of 10, and can also change the emotions depending on the situation. So if somebody comes in and they have had a really bad day at home, but Oliver has just won 2 million euros on the lottery, Oliver can manage his emotions to the extent to put aside the win and to show real empathy with the person. Now, he's not faking it when he does that. He is genuinely feeling that this person has had a problem or something at home. And that's quite interesting. Social awareness, 10 out of 10. And that is sensing how other people feel. So, you may not be sure whether the person had a hard time at home. Oliver is really, really good at knowing how people are at home. And I can say, how people are feeling generally. And I can say this is 100% true, because when we start a session, he'll take one look at my face or my behavior or how I'm moving my hands, probably unconsciously, and he'll say, Max, why are you having a shit day? Or why are you having a rough day? Or why are you having a good day? And that is a great intuitive sense to have a look at there. And finally, relationship management. This is clearly Oliver's strength, is that he's able to use his emotions to guide and influence the way that he wants conversations in the organization to go. So when he needs more budget, or when he needs to implement a new data warehouse, or he needs technology or something, he is very good at reading not his emotions so much, reading the emotions of the other person, because the self-awareness is a bit lower, but reading the other person, see how they react, and then he uses the self-management to adjust the way that he is presenting to them, watches their reaction to that, makes another adjustment to his emotions, and keeps looking at them like a game of chess, adjusting until he always gets his way, what he is looking for from the person. So Oliver, what is your take on all of that?
It's again very, very interesting. Insightful. Interesting is the wrong word, right? So what I really try to do is but it's also a bit given, right? So that's how I'm set up. I try first from a leadership point of view to keep away stress from my team. So in general, acting a bit like an umbrella, right? And also if I have stress and pressure, not to immediately bring it down, right? To really be there like a filter. That I see this as a core, let's say, core characteristic of a leader. So that reflects there, and also getting individual by leadership. And by my nature, I'm interested in people in general, and also how they generally feel. And I try really to be emotional. Sometimes it was said that leaders should not be emotional and getting really attached to people. I completely fundamentally disagree, or I would not be the right person for this organization. Then I really try to get to really understand people independently where they are, and independently if I'm at the moment completely on the lower side of my emotional stability, or on the very upside, if I won in the lottery or my mother died, for example, right? I try to be really stable and handle people accordingly. So I think it reflects, obviously. I think maybe I have good capability to feel how others feel, also in a private environment, but I don't know if it is a 10 of 10, right? So
What I'm amazed about is that you love to show your emotions, you say. How do you cope living in Switzerland?
My dream was living in Switzerland. I had a girlfriend when I was 18, 19, 20 in Zurich. It's about 3 hours ride from Switzerland. And when I met my wife in 2001, I said we will live in Switzerland at one time, but it took us to another part of Germany and Belgium. I just love Switzerland. It's a stereotype, right? Like there are stereotypes about each country. Switzerland is really lovely, and I have really, really good relationships here.
Fantastic.
Now we should get Swiss.
You will too, yes, when
I get my passport
comes through. I just want to quickly look at the chat here. Anna, yes, so you are a theorist, a little bit like me there, 0.375 higher. Folks, I just want to point out the reason that the scores tend to be quite similar on the secondary scores is that you were doing the free version of the test rather than the paid version. The free version has fewer questions, and so the scores tend to be more similar to each other. If you do the, I think you have to pay £10 or 15 euros or however many dollars to get a full version. That will give you more differentiated scores on the learning style. But in general, your primary one will be the same, whether you do the short or the long version. Stevie, interesting. It doesn't come as a surprise to me that you are a reflector. It does a little bit with the openness, but then the fact that you are quite introverted would go together with being a reflector, because as an introvert, you like being on your own. When you are in a crowd, how do you defend yourself when you are an introvert and you are in a crowd? So always look at your personality scores as the anchor of your life. When you look at the reflector, interpret that in terms of your personality. So I see reflector as being your highest, and I also then see that you are an introvert. I say yes, those go together. If you were a reflector and an extrovert, in other words, a very high extroversion score, I would say something is going on, and we need to look at why and how you cope when you are in that situation. But as it stands, it goes well. Then you are a pragmatist, as you say, that's great, because that means you are open to new experiences. You had that very high openness score, but you are also able to apply what you learn. I would say you pretty much have the profile, just looking at that, of an inventor, Stevie. So I don't know who you are. I've never met you. I have no idea whether you are male or female, Stevie, in it. But I would say that you are somebody who regularly comes up with new implementable ideas. Stevie, I would want you on my team as the person who implements the results that come out of the people analytics that we do. So we do a big analysis. I would want you there to implement what we find, because you will find novel and interesting ways of implementing it with that profile. Anthony, let's have a look there. I hope I haven't skipped anyone in the chat. Reflector 21, theorist 35, all these theorists today. Go theorists, we are the champions. We get people like Stevie and Oliver to do the work for us, yeah, while we read books and learn. Yeah, that's very interesting. So you like to study in the background. You're probably the person who learns about the strategy, how to create it, but then will hand over to someone else to do it. I hope your smile is a smile of agreement. Karen, 32%, yes, you're sort of a clone of Oliver. I'd like to look, I wish I knew whether you were a Karen or a Karen. I'm guessing that it's going to be a Karen because it would be an I otherwise. I'd like to actually chat to you about all your scores in total, would be quite interesting. But time moves on. Folks, if you need to go, you are welcome to go. We'll keep going for a while. And you can get the recording to get the rest of it. Oliver, I think you probably have a hard stop at some point.
Yeah, actually, maybe because I need to teach at university today, so I need 5 minutes, maybe maximum.
Okay, well, that means we didn't quite get through the resilience. What we can do is, let's cut it there, Oliver. needs to go. Actually, I'll stay on and go through the scores just to explain for those of you that have done the tests, but maybe Barry will give us the opportunity to bring you back and to have a longer session where we can actually look at all of your scores as well. So Oliver, if you need to drop out, I'll quickly finish going through these scores and we'll talk about you behind your back, basically.
No problem. So before I leave, so to everybody, so you will say goodbye at the end, Max, but thanks a lot. And it's really insightful when you have Max to look into your scores and helping developing yourself. What I find with Max very interesting that he has a coaching capability, right? Because he's an educated coach as being a psychologist, but he is also deeply understanding people analytics. So from the strategic topics, really making strategy down to writing an R or Python code. And this combination of the three things is, from my point of view, really, really unique. And on top, he's a nice person, right? So
you are very kind. I owe you beers at the very least. Thank you very much, Oliver. And you are a pleasure to work with because you are courageous. Let me just say that that is important in coaching, is that the client has to have the courage to make the changes that the coach will say and to bring them through. And you are very courageous. So well done.
Perfect. I wish you a great remaining session, and sorry that I need to leave, but my students
No,
are waiting.
thank you for joining us. It was a pleasure.
Take care. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue and finish the test so that at least in the on-demand, you'll be able to pick them up a bit later. I'm sure Barry will end the session thing, and that's a pleasure, Olympus. Thank you very much for joining. Aulia, I just want to have a look at your scores here quickly. Also, a reflector. Is that your high? No, you are another theorist. Pragmatist. So you are the person who likes to do the work, which is quite interesting, and you need there to be an application. I would love to see your other scores as well. Benjamin, theorist, is that your highest? Yeah, we could have a whole discussion on all of these folks. I want to move on just in case people have got a hard stop just to get through the test, but please carry on in the chat, and you can contact me on LinkedIn if you want to. Okay, so looking at Oliver's resilience scores, I think resilience is critical in the workplace. So you can see that his total resilience is 63. It's high. I think it could be a little bit higher. In somebody who's in a leadership role, for example, I would be looking for a total score maybe of around 70 to 75. Fortunately, to go to Littal's earlier point, is it nature or nurture or is it learned? Resilience is definitely something that you can learn. So there are, again, if you do the test, a lot of exercises from Kerry Cooper about how you can develop them more. What are the components that make a human being resilient? Well, the person is confident. They have got a great social support network. They are adaptable to change, which in this world you obviously have to be increasingly, and they have a sense of purpose. So let's just have a look at what each of those means in terms of Oliver's scores. So confidence is knowing that what you are doing is the right thing. It doesn't mean being arrogant. It means a quiet confidence in yourself. I'm probably very bad at quiet confidence, because if I feel I know something, I will push it much too hard, which makes me not a great leader, by the way. It probably makes me a better coach or a better psychologist, but not at leading teams, because I wouldn't have the patience. I will be sure that I am right. Oliver is 15 out of 20, is generally confident. He will often show that he has more confidence in a situation than he really does, which can let you down occasionally, but in general, that is quite a high confidence score. Social support, that is something that you need to work on. It doesn't just happen. You need to go and choose a social support group around you so that when you hit times of stress, you can draw on the people in your social support network that you've got to support you. Adaptability, well, this is the ability to change your behavior if circumstances change. So if, let's say that there's a big round of redundancies at work, I'm choosing mainly negative examples because this is when you need resilience. Can you change your behavior to go and find a new role, or to show people that you are the best person, that they should not make you redundant, instead of just saying, oh, my life is over, I'm finished? If you combine that with a high neuroticism score, so if you have very low adaptability and very high neuroticism, you definitely need to work on having a great social support group, and maybe even a fairly full-time coach or a full-time therapist, because life can be very tough for you under those circumstances. And that's adaptability. And then the last one, which comes up a lot with resilience: do you have a sense of purpose in your life? If you just go wherever the wind takes you to the next thing, when there is trouble ahead, you will not have a clear star to guide you that, look, this is temporary trouble. Look at the inflation that the world is having at the moment. Many people now do not have savings goals or a particular place they're going, so they cannot adjust their behavior for what is happening now. That is critically important. If you want to increase your resilience, is that you have a star, a North Star, as they say, and you are constantly moving towards that. It will be so much help when seas get choppy around you. Okay, and we're coming up the straight, and then I'm going to leave you with one other one, is risk-taking. Okay, this one is quite funny, and I'm really sorry that Oliver is not here to discuss this one. Oliver is one of the highest risk takers I've ever met in my life. As he was talking about his love of motorcycling and going really fast on really curvy roads, etc., that is reflected quite a lot in his sensation seeking. Now, as a leader, it means that you will tend to get a lot of attention, whether you look for it or not, because you will always be doing cool projects or doing high profile projects. Is quite interesting as a sensation seeker. Harm avoidance is, do you think about the consequences always of what you do? Fairly low score there. Conscientiousness, now this is measured in a different way to the 5-factor. I think that this is probably, it's very similar to Oliver's other score in that he was on the high end anyway, but I would look at the 5-factor for my score on this one. Locus of control is very interesting. This is the extent to which you determine your behavior versus internally, in other words, versus externally, other people controlling your behavior for you. Comfort with ambiguity. Well, there's no question that we live in ambiguous organizations are ambiguous. So the company may say one thing, but they do another. Your manager tells you to do one thing, but you can tell that you will not do well unless you do something different. How well do you tolerate that kind of ambiguity in life? Of course, there should not be ambiguity, but the fact is that there is. So you are looking again to learn how to tolerate ambiguity. Reward orientation. This is an interesting one. If somebody offers you enough rewards, some money, to take a big risk and to take on a project or to code something in this way, etc., would you take it? Clearly, in Oliver's place, in Oliver's scores, it shows that if somebody offers him a reward, he is far more likely to take a risk in that situation. And I'm going to come back. Oh, Littell, risk taker. He agreed to share his results here. Yes, exactly. That you can see immediately that he is a risk taker from that. Great. You see, you're a natural coach there, Littell. And finally, try not to go beyond the slide. If you look at slide number, the meaning test. I don't know, it's not showing a number on mine. But anyway, choose your top 10 values below. What this is about is it will show you what are your main motivational drivers in life? So choose the top 10 of these, and the next slide will show you how to score it. I would encourage you not to look at this next slide until you have chosen your top 10 values in your life from the list below. And I can show you Oliver's. Actually, I didn't put the scoring key. If you want to, that's good. I can show you thing. Oliver's came out that his main driver is self-esteem, which is great because he's moving on towards actualization. If you look at the next slide, so he's got 4 for self-esteem as his highest. Next, that he is driven by actualizing. Next, driven by love, belonging. Next, security and safety, and virtually no meaning from the physiological level. That is a very ideal profile. You want your high scores. Ideally you want to be, the highest score is actualization and then coming down. If you don't understand what that means, you should watch yesterday's 45-minute session on how to interpret meaningfulness. And we have already gone 10 minutes over. So I want to say I will cut it there, but let's take 5 minutes if people have got any questions, and we can discuss those. No further questions on that? Okay, I want to say thank you very much for joining us today, and it's been a great pleasure sharing with you and having you share your scores with me. Thanks very much, Lital. Thank you, everybody. And please do connect on LinkedIn if you have questions. Anthony, thank you very much. Great pleasure. Thanks, Alia. Thanks, honey. Cool. I'll check us out.